Nice. You went to more detail than I wanted, but that's good. 3 days. I was just looking for the 3 days thing, right? So that was the commonality. So what would have happened, probably you wake up in the morning, I had this really weird dream. Oh, you did? Well, so did I. What was your dream? And they would have both noticed, well, there's a 3 involved. And so you would have seen, not only was it a vivid, probably one-of-a-kind dream, but also there's a similarity between the two, which would have piqued their interest even more. So we saw that the response that they had was they were dejected or depressed, depending on how you translate. And why were they depressed? Do you remember? There was no one to interpret the dream. We talked about in the past that in ancient cultures, dreams are a big deal. And they had elaborate books, scrolls written on interpreting dreams. They also had people that their specialty was interpreting dreams. So it was a big deal for them. So here you have these two individuals, a baker and a cupbearer, and they're upset because they've had a significant dream, but no one can tell us what it means. Now Joseph came in, and Joseph noticed right away that they were down, they were depressed. And so he talked to them, and he asked them what was wrong. Now that's kind of significant. We talked about that too. Now, Joseph has been in prison for a while, and even before that he was a slave. We talked about that there's probably not much in the way of bitterness with Joseph, because bitter people usually don't worry about what? Other people, because their life is hard enough. So bitter people don't usually worry about other people. Joseph wasn't bitter. Despite his circumstances, he is engaged in what's going on. He talks to these people. And when they say, we've had this dream, and no one can tell us what it means, his response to them was, don't dreams, interpretations belong to God. And so he asked, can you please tell me? And so they did. They told him. The cupbearer had a dream that involved a vine and 3 buds that turned into blossoms that then turned into grapes. He then took the grapes, put them in Pharaoh's cup, which happened to magically appear in his hand, I'm guessing. It's like a CGI kind of dream, right? And then he gave it into Pharaoh's hand. And so, and we mentioned last week, it's a good thing that this dream was told first, because it's a positive dream, right? And so, basically what happened was Joseph said, in 3 days, you'll be restored to your place. Wow, that's great. And so the baker says, all right, well, that's pretty good. I think I'll tell him my dream. My dream involved 3 baskets on my head, and there's birds eating the bread out of my head. Oh, well, your dream isn't quite as fun. That's a real rough translation, right? He just spoke very clearly. He said, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head versus lift up your head, like he said to the cupbearer, and he'll impale you on a tree, and birds will eat your flesh off you. And sure enough, in 3 days, Pharaoh had a birthday. He brought these 2 people in. Now, like we talked about last week, trying to put ourselves in the place of these people, okay? It's 3 days, and all of a sudden you're summoned. Oh, it's just 3 days. It's going kind of like you said, you know. And if you're the cupbearer, you're still kind of apprehensive. But if you're the butler, you're probably scared spitless. And just like Joseph said, the dreams came true. We also saw that Joseph asked the cupbearer to please remember me. And basically what he's asking for the cupbearer to appeal to Pharaoh on his behalf, because he shouldn't be in prison. That's essentially what he's saying. So that's how the story left off from last week. And this week we're going to pick up. I'm very ambitious. I'm going for 37 verses. Wish me luck. So 1 through 37. We're going to read verses 1 through 13 first. So we're going to start here with Mr. Riley. Chapter 41, Genesis, and verse 1. Let's go to you, Sarah. Verse 3. Verse 10, Carolyn, if you have it. Verse 10 if you have it, yeah. Okay, we'll stop right there. So we're looking today at Pharaoh's dreams. So it says in verse 1, 2 full years. Now I'm tempted to say you could probably translate it 2 long years. Okay, these are long years for Joseph. You remember Joseph's last words of the cupbearer? What were they? Remember me before Pharaoh. And so there again, I like to try to get into the character of what it would have been like. So you're Joseph. Remember me. He leaves. Oh, in 3 days, maybe a week, I should get my hearing because this guy won't forget me because, this is a big deal. And then he forgot you, And just how it might have been for Joseph, 2 weeks has gone by, a month has gone by, 2 months has gone by, and nothing has happened. And we talked about how disappointing that could have been for him. Now, we don't get any intimation from Scripture that he endured disappointment or discouragement, but I'm sorry, I just can't imagine he didn't have those thoughts as you're looking at things and how they're going for him. A few days turns into 2 long years. Now, at this point of the dream, how long has Joseph been in Egypt? Actually 13 years, I believe, because he was 17 and he's 30, so it's about 13 years, give or take a little bit, okay? So he's been there a long time. Now, from Joseph's dreams, remember Joseph's dreams before he was sold into captivity? What did his dreams seem to say? What was going to happen to Joseph? Yeah, he's going to be a leader, but not only a leader, his own family would bow down to him. So it's almost like royalty. So if he understood what the dreams meant, and we can assume he did since his brothers fully understood it, I'm in prison. I'm kind of in charge of the prison, but, it's not quite what the dreams seem to say. So you could also have that disappointment running in your head, too. I really kind of thought it was going to work out different, but it didn't. Now, let me ask this question. Do you think Joseph has changed at all during these 13 years? He's gotten older. Unlike the rest of us, right, Dave? I look at a picture at 18, it's just almost exactly the same. Anyway, yeah, he's gotten older, but what else, thinking about the larger story, how has Joseph changed during this 13 years? Bill?
He's learning leadership skills from the bottom up.
Nice.
And what I've seen oftentimes is people at the bottom know things people at the top don't know.
Yes.
And so he's learning that perspective and learning how to deal with people. When they're not putting on airs, he sees how they really are, and he's learning people skills.
Nice, that's good, good. Anyone else? How else might Joseph, Peggy? Faith deepen? Think about that. I agree with you. His faith deepened, but that's almost, what's the word? A paradox, right? Because things are going crummy. I'm a slave. Oh, I've been accused of a crime. I'm in prison, and your faith deepens. It seems like it should be the other way around, right? One of those, I didn't sign up for this kind of thing, right? Jen? Okay, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. I come to this class to learn, by the way. I never go away disappointed. Peggy.
Trials happen in two ways, as either using our faith or shaking our faith. And he just
Yes, he does. Yes.
Well, I was going to say, what do you focus on? He could be for me, but he's choosing not to focus on that and take the benefit.
Yes, he is. He's always engaging. Good, good, good. Another thing I'm thinking about, and I think in one of our classes a couple weeks ago, somebody mentioned it, that he may have had a streak of arrogance in him. We don't know for sure, but we're talking about in the beginning, because either he was arrogant or naive when he brags to his brothers about these dreams. Hey, guess what, and then you bowed down to me. Isn't that great? No, it's not great. He did it twice, and mom and dad bowed down to me too. I mean, naive or vanity, but in either case, it ain't there no more. And we're going to see that. So Joseph has changed, well, in more ways than I realized, just from the way people were adding here. That's great, great. So here's a question for you. Is it common for us to wait? Stu says no. You're an exception, brother. Anyone else? Yeah, Eric.
We want instant gratification.
We're Americans. We invented the microwave, right? We deserve it. Absolutely we deserve it, right? How many times have you heard that? You deserve the best. I do? Why? I don't know. Why? Why does God make us wait when it's very obvious that what we want is His will? Let's say it's the salvation of a child who isn't saved, somebody who's walking away from the Lord. That's very obviously God's will. I'm praying for it. It ain't happening. Why? Why? Jen?
There's many times when we see that God could have given us what we wanted then, and it would have been far less than what we thought when we waited.
Okay.
In the waiting, things have deepened, convictions have grown, and the result is way more than what it would have been if it was sooner and right away.
Okay. He might give it later, but if he gave it to us now under our conditions, it wouldn't have perhaps had the impact? Or is that kind of how I'm paraphrasing, right? Okay. Julie. Okay. Working through adversity.
You also become God. I want it this way.
That's true.
My wants always are more important.
God becomes our genie. Rub the lamp, that kind of thing. Good, good. What would it be like? There's some children in here, so I'm sure you'll disagree with me. But what if we gave our kids everything they wanted every time they wanted it? Yeah, Riley, I know. Woohoo! Yes. Oh, you're celebrating. Okay. But think about that. And kids, I know that you'll agree with me. I think you will. Maybe you won't admit it. But what are you going to become if you get everything you want every time you want? Spoiled brat. Okay? Your parents aren't in the business of raising spoiled brats. Neither's God. God's not in the business of raising spoiled brats. He's in the business of raising up people to follow Him and to be His servants. And sometimes, maybe often, that involves waiting. I want it now. You said it's important. I want it now. Well, that's fine. I'll get to you later. Right now, we're working on something else. We're working on you and the person or the thing that you want. It's not all about you, is it? Yeah, go ahead. Good. It keeps us constantly on Him because, even though we're disappointed, we know theologically only God can make it happen, so we cling to Him all the more. And that's kind of the paradox that Peggy was alluding to a second ago about his faith being deepened. Humanly speaking, that doesn't make sense. Humanly speaking, it seems like it should be the opposite, but that's not how God works, right? That's why his faith is deepened. Jen? Right.
But that night,
Right. That's a good point. Great. Bill.
There's a lot of times some things take a long time to mature.
Good.
Like when I'm working on a room and I have to do drywall, I've got to put the drywall mud on. It's a process.
Yes.
You have to let it dry. You have to let it get firm. And I think our lives are a lot like that. We have to walk through that hardship. There's things that I'm looking at as an older father that I appreciate about my parents. And I'm thinking, okay, I started with this. I bet my dad did too. As a human, when I go through this kind of thing, I see from totally different eyes as I walk through in the older age of what he went through. It's a little bit like that drywall mud is solidifying it, making it strong and making it something of value rather than something of quickness. It's faith stuff.
Nice. That's great. And I know that Bill's mentioned to me before that I think about every so often the fact that, you know, for most of us, it requires time to mature. It requires, God can take a shortcut, sure, but he doesn't do that very much. He's not into shortcuts. He's into time. Thanks for mentioning that. Other biblical examples are like Moses, for example. Moses, it says in Acts chapter 7 during Stephen's speech that Moses understood or thought that God was going to deliver the Israelites through him at 40 years old with a military background, etc. And God said no. In fact, God sent him into the desert for 40 years to make him wait, to cause him to mature, to be ready. In fact, when God came to him at age 80, I mean, I don't mean to sound irreverent when I say this, it was all God could do to convince him to go. He was, no, I can't do that. No, you know. So, mission accomplished. Moses was now ready to go back to Israel, face Pharaoh with the Lord. So it was a lot different than what he probably had planned. John.
I think these are illustrations too of the principle that God cares more about making the man than the circumstances, that he always cares about the heart.
Yes.
He cares about the circumstances. He cares about all the details. But he's primarily concerned about making us more like Christ and preparing us for heaven.
Yes.
Preparing us for eternity. Forming us to his image. And so, I think sometimes too that, I mean, that's the picture too of how we should direct our prayers. That, you know, our prayers for our own self should be more about God making us more like Christ than about our circumstances. We ought to pray about our circumstances, but there should be, you know, this weight towards dealing with our sin and growing in holiness and seeking the Lord to work in us, that, you know, cares less about what's going on. And so,
Nice. Good. Bill, do you have something else?
Yeah, Moses going through that, we rarely see anybody that God took through that much.
Mm-hmm.
And yet God said he was the most humble man there with it.
Yes. And it's probably because of that 40 years of fun and in the desert, right? Herding very compliant sheep, I'm sure. All right, we got to move on because I'm already way over my time. But this is really important, I think, for us to realize, and you folks have definitely added to it. God isn't just concerned about the end, he's concerned about the means, and he's concerned about how to get us to the end. He wants us to be, and it takes time. It's not anything quick, typically. All right, so we see 7 beautiful and less than beautiful cows in verses 2 to 4. Dr. Wolverd, who is a theologian from Dallas Theological Seminary, he said this is Egyptian to the very core. And what he means by that is this is something that Pharaoh would have seen frequently, and you'll see it even today. You go to Egypt along the Nile, cows go into the water. Why do they go into the water? Because it's hot and there's flies. And in the evening, what happens? The cows walk up out of the Nile and they start grazing by the Nile. So this scene that Pharaoh is seeing in his dream, nothing unusual about that, except, you know, they're obviously exceptionally beautiful cows, and that strikes him. It's like, oh, look at that. So he sees this thing, and so he sees 7 cows grazing by the Nile. And then we see 7 more arise from the Nile, and they're different. They're ugly, and they're very thin. So he watches them come up, and they stand beside the cows that are grazing, and suddenly, we don't know what this looks like, but suddenly they ate them up. They consumed them, and yet they look the same as before. It's interesting to me that whenever God deals with Pharaoh, it always seems that he deals with Pharaoh in a way that attacks Pharaoh's gods. Because this god is represented, the god, I don't know if I'll pronounce this correctly, but Osiris, I believe it is represented in Egyptian theology as a bull with 7 cows. I mean, and then you look, I was just talking to Katie Evans a little bit ago, I guess in Justin's class, they're talking about, the plagues and whatnot. In the same way that God deals with Egypt's gods to punish Egypt. In this case, it's an attack on Osiris, as it were. And we'll see, in the 10 plagues, each one is addressing a impotent god of Egypt. It's interesting how God works. And then in verses 5 to 7, we see 7 healthy and less than healthy ears of wheat. And again, we see the healthy ones are consumed. So there you have it. You have these 2 dreams he has back to back. He wakes up in the morning in verse 8, and what's his reaction to it? What's that? No, he gives an emotion. He's troubled, right. So his spirit was troubled. So in other words, again, I think like the cupbearer and the baker, they realize this is more than a dream. It's either the vividness of it or whatever, but something struck him like this is not just a dream like the wacky dreams that most of us have, but this is something of great significance. And so again, a lot of energy goes into interpreting dreams in Egypt. And so Pharaoh, unlike the butler, I keep calling him the butler, unlike the cupbearer and the baker, Pharaoh has limitless resources to figure out what these dreams mean. I mean, he's like, the president. The president has a problem. He could probably hit a button or whatever and have a dozen people gathered around him to solve the problems. I'm sure it happens frequently. So here he says, I have this issue and involves dreams. That's my specialty, And so in come the magicians and the wise men. That's what it's all about. They got the scrolls, all this, All right, let us have it. And so he's going to tell them the dreams. However, in verse 8 again, Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Now this also is astonishing to me, not because they couldn't interpret it, but they didn't make something up. I mean, these are the wise guys. Sounds funny, doesn't it? These are the wise men and the people who know the dreams and stuff, and it wouldn't be unlikely for them to just make something up. It could sound reasonable, but they didn't do that. They're like, we have no idea, which must have frustrated Pharaoh, and also it adds to the importance of the dream. How important or significant must this dream be that my wisest people have no idea, and they're willing to admit it? They're willing to admit they don't. That also is very huge. They're willing to admit it. So now you have Pharaoh, in my mind, sitting down frustrated. Great, I know this means something. And then all of a sudden, one of his best friends, right, the cupbearer, says, you know what? I'm reminded of my sins. I'm reminded of something that happened long ago, and I'm guilty of it. And then he relates to Pharaoh what the situation was. That he and the baker had the dreams, which last class we talked about why he might have forgotten to tell Pharaoh, and there's some ideas of why he might have forgotten. He might have got caught up in the celebration, the hoopla, he's released and this and that, or maybe he didn't want to tell Pharaoh, whatever. But whatever the case, whether it was intentional or unintentional, now he's reminded, oh yes, there is this young man in prison, and we had these dreams, and he told us what they meant. And sure enough, you remember, I hate to bring this back up to you, but you hung the other guy, and me you let, back in, okay? And so he tells him. Now we see God's providence involved here. How is God's providence involved? How do we see that, Peggy? Okay. Okay. That's an idea. Didn't think about that. Good. How might this signify, demonstrate God's providence again? The very fact that he forgot, whether he forgot intentionally or not, now the Lord brings him into a position where he has to say. I mean, I know he could have chosen not to, but he realizes he has to say. Plus, he can get favor with Pharaoh if he finds the guy who can interpret, right? So, providentially, he has him forget until he needs him to remember. And at that point, he brings it to mind and he appeals to Pharaoh. So let's pick up from there. I believe we're at Lori, and we'll read verses 14 to 32.
Joseph then answered Joseph, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer.
Okay, in verse 20, Melody.
I saw also in my dream, and behold, 7 years full into it came upon a single dog.
Below 7 years, the group came and were expecting to sprout up after them.
And we'll go over to Scott.
Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do.
And over there.
The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good years are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same.
27. Verse 28, Sam. All right, thank you. Hold on right there. So we're looking at an unlikely interpreter. So we see that Joseph is summoned. Now this shows Pharaoh's desperation. He's willing to bring a prisoner up out of prison, a Hebrew no less, a foreigner, who may or may not be able to tell him the meaning of the dream. So Pharaoh is showing a degree of desperation. Now imagine being Joseph, again, trying to climb into his head, as it were. It's been 2 long years. You've been there day in, day out. You're doing your job. We don't know if there's any times where he has doubt or discouragement. The scriptures don't seem to indicate that. He seems to keep right on going and plugging along no matter what. And 2 years, wow. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, somebody comes to the door of the prison and says, "We're here to pick up Joseph and take him to Pharaoh." Whoa, what? Now imagine, it's been 2 years. You're just doing your day-to-day thing, and all of a sudden, the king, the president, calls you and says, "I want you at the White House right away." Imagine that, right? Why? And maybe he wasn't told why. Chances are he wasn't. He just says, Pharaoh says, "Come on down." And so he goes. But we notice that he kind of prepares a little bit, right? He checks out the 3-piece suit. He gets a shave, because you're going before Egyptian royalty, and Egyptians kind of had a thing about cleanliness, something I can't even say, truly. And so he's going to be all cleaned up. He's going to be clean-shaven, which he probably hasn't been since he's been 8 years old, right? And he's going to go in there in front of Pharaoh. So imagine all this stuff going on all at once. It just, boom, there it is. Do you have something you're going to say, Bill? I can see your hand moving.
This whole shaving thing is not a Jewish thing. The Jews did not shave.
I know.
In fact, it was considered later on a shame to shave.
Right.
So Joseph was unique to allow certain things to happen for God's glory.
Oh, okay. Good. That's a good point. I didn't see where you were going with that, but now I see where you're going with that. He was willing to go through that in order to glorify God and appear before Pharaoh. Nice.
Sometimes too, some of the things that we hold to so strongly may not, necessarily be God's will. We may have to give up something, not sin, obviously.
Right.
But some of our little quirky things that we hold on to may have to go by the wayside, both in clothes that we wear, because it's probably not Jewish clothes,
True.
and his dress, his appearance.
Good. In fact, go along with what Bill is saying, so dramatic is the difference that when his brothers appear to him in a short while, they won't recognize him. They won't recognize him at all. Interesting. He looked thoroughly Egyptian by the time he was done. Okay, so his conversation, Pharaoh's conversation in verse 15. "I've heard it said about you," of course by the cupbearer. Maybe the cupbearer's back there going, "I've heard it said about you that you can interpret dreams." And I absolutely love it. And it goes back to what has been said in the class so far. We see Joseph's humility and his faith. He doesn't say, "Well, yes, actually I do. I've been doing this for quite some time, and I've established quite a portfolio. In fact, you may have heard about the cupbearer," and, No. He doesn't at all claim anything. His humility blows my mind. He didn't with the cupbearer baker either, right? In chapter 40, verse 8, it says, "Don't interpretations belong to God?" He didn't say, "Well, maybe I know." He goes right back to God, which tells us, again, that Joseph's been very vocal about his faith. He's not somebody who hides it. He's been vocal about it. And same thing for here. He says in, which verse is it? Joseph answered, "It's not in me," verse 16. "God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." He might use me, but it's not me. It's God. And he uses the generic word for God, which is Elohim, because that's what they would have understood. They wouldn't have understood God by his personal name at that point. Okay, so we see that he gives credit to God. And then we see he relates the dreams. Pharaoh relates the dreams to Joseph. With some added details, we see in, in verse 19 and 21, he talks about the cows. He says, they're ugly, such as I've never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. These are the ugliest cows I've ever seen. So he didn't say that at first, but now he does. And he also adds information in verse 21 that when the thin, ugly cows ate the thriving fat cows, they didn't look any different. I mean, you'd think you're consuming, 300 or 400 pounds of beef. you'd change, but he said they were no different. So a couple of details. So Joseph immediately understands, and the magicians weren't able. All the educated people of Egypt were stumped. The people highly trained in dream interpretation had no clue. But Joseph understands. And again, he immediately points to God. He doesn't say, I've got it. I know what it is. He says in verse 25, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told the Pharaoh what he's about to do. Okay? And also when you read this, after I've read this a few times, I get the idea that Joseph is almost giddy telling about the dreams because of the way he tells them. I don't mean that in any way negative. It's just like he's so excited. Just the way he tells it, I almost get the impression that he's almost giddy telling him what this means. But he says, it's God. It's not me. Also, it says in verse 25, God is telling Pharaoh God's plan. Now, this could potentially be a little humbling for Pharaoh to hear. Why would that be? True, and one more reason. Yes? Right. Now, we don't know that every Pharaoh believed this or proclaimed this. Some definitely did. I don't know if this one did or not, but let's say he did. Well, I'm a god. Sure you are, with a little g, right? So it could have been a little humbling for Pharaoh to hear this. God is, I thought I was, no, anyway. So we see 2 sets of 7, okay? So originally, when Joseph had his dreams, he had 2 dreams, okay? When we see the butler, cupbearer, and baker, just go with it, right? They each had 1 dream for 2, and here we have Pharaoh who has 2 dreams. So we keep seeing this repetition go through. 2 sets of 7. We have 7 very good years, followed by 7 very, very bad years of famine. In fact, the famine will be so bad that everybody will forget there was ever any prosperity. It'll go on and on forever, and he doesn't say this, of course, but the end result would be mass death. It would be death by famine, death by starvation. It would be horrible. So, Joseph repeats it twice. Joseph says, it's repeated twice because God's going to quickly bring it about. So, in other words, starting today, very loose paraphrase, starting today, it's going to happen. God told you twice. It's going to happen now. So, let's stop there. Okay, I know that verses 33 went on, but I want to stop right there. So there you are in front of Pharaoh. You have just given this information. What comes next, do you suppose? Humanly speaking, what should be next? Yes? Couldn't hear you. Okay. Okay. That's an interesting thought. Pharaoh might be angry because you're predicting disaster on my country. And see, I learned all sorts of things in this class. I didn't think about that. That's good. Jen? Okay, bring in other interpretations. Matthew? That's what I'm thinking. Thank you very much, and, we'll get back to you. Okay? Julie?
The cost of being wrong is death, and they all know it. The conditions that,
Okay.
and they all know it.
They all know the cost of being wrong could be death? Yeah. Who knows what kind of person Pharaoh is? That's true. There are, aren't there? That's good. So I would expect one of several different things to have occurred. Either, well, thank you, Joseph, and, you go back to jail. Or it could be, wow, that sounds really, thank you for sharing that. We're going to set you free and give you some gifts because of this incredible prophecy, because they recognize it as being true. They recognize it as being a fact, which we'll see in just a moment. So let's say they do recognize this is really factual. Well, thank you, Joseph. Here's a gift, and you're free to go. And what would he have done? He would have probably went right back up to Canaan, said hi to Dad. All the brothers would have gotten disciplined, etc. Or he could have said, well, that sounds great. Well, we're going to put you back in prison, and we're going to see if this comes true or not. Okay. There's all sorts of things that could have happened. I favor what Matthew said. That's the first thing I thought of. Thank you for your service. Go back to jail. Yes.
There's an intensity going on here, though, also.
Yes.
Because, we're right
Good. Yes.
They're grass eaters, and he's watching these dark cows come out of the water. And then the unexpected, they come up and they eat the other cows. And he's like, ugh, this is wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Good.
And so the intensity here is huge.
It is.
Adds to the whole drama.
Yes. Good. Thanks for. And there again, I like to try to see it from their eyes, and that's what you're doing there. Yes, Julie.
And I think of the healthy cows, things are going well in Egypt, they're in prosperity as America,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't start saving up when you have everything you need. So this is a new way of life that's coming, and,
That's a great point. It is, isn't it? Because usually you have a good year, I'm going to get a new chariot, right? Or I'm going to add on to the pyramid. Lem. Yeah, he loved hearing the interpretation for the good cows, maybe not so much for the bad cows. Good point. Okay, so, but what happened next would not be expected. What happened next is he gives advice to the king. The prisoner, the foreigner, gives advice to the king. This is not normal, nor is it welcome, and nor would it ever happen usually. Okay? I can just see the advisors if they're going, whoa, 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 what are you doing? It'd be like you being invited to the White House for some reason, and then out of the blue you start to give advice to the president, Well, wait a minute, although you wouldn't be put to death by the president. You might by the Pharaoh. Now, I know it adds on to it. I give it a hesitation that's not there, but the point is, this is huge. It really is that he gives advice to Pharaoh. So, Jen, we're with you. Let's read verses 33 to 37.
now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt.
34, if you have it there, Levi, or not? Okay, let's go over to Amy. Matthew 37. Okay, so we see Joseph continues with advice. Now, like I said before, there's no big hesitation. I don't think he gives this saying there's this long pause. I think he just keeps right on talking. I think the Holy Spirit's indwelled Joseph, and he says not only the interpretation, but what he should do. And it's such a seamless thing, he just goes right into it. And the fact that they recognize his interpretation of being correct is the fact they tolerate him doing that. They allow him to keep talking. There's something that occurs as he's talking. They realize what he just said is true. It's the only thing that makes sense, and it's true. And then he keeps talking. They allow him. They don't shut him down like they might have for anyone else. So he's looking for a discerning and wise leader. Now, could this be another slam against Pharaoh? Unlike you, we need a discerning and wise leader. It could have been taken that way. But really, in context, Joseph is advising for another leader to be selected to prepare the kingdom for the upcoming famine. The idea is this is going to be so complex, it's going to take a discerning and wise leader 7 years to make it work. So he's not really insulting Pharaoh, but he's saying, in essence, I don't think you'll have time for this, Pharaoh, but you need to have somebody to address this full time. Julie? Well, we'll get to that. Or rather, Bill will get to that next week, because Bill's teaching next week. He gets all the good stuff, Okay. Okay, so also it's important to get the right person. You really do need the right person in this position. Why? Your life depends on it. If you get the wrong person, you get a tyrant that can manipulate and control and take charge because you got the food supply, right? But if you get the right person, then you live and you thrive. And that's what Joseph is essentially saying. He also says you need to promote some overseers of food production. He talks about overseers. In each city, we need to have people that are responsible for the food production. So it's not just a one-man job, it's many people involved here. And also we see in verse 34, it's an increase in taxes. Now, ancient Egypt literature seems to indicate that they were taxed at a rate of about 10%. That is to say, 10% of your wheat or whatever would be given to the king. Joseph is talking about doubling that. It's kind of like if Biden gets elected, right? No, sorry. No, he's talking about doubling the taxes. That's not going to be popular, right? It so happens that there's going to be so much abundance they might not mind it that much, you know what I mean? But it's going to be double the tax that they're paying now. And also to store it in preparation for the coming famine. So we're going to have granaries in nearby cities. There's going to be a collecting point, a central point that could be guarded, protected by Pharaoh. So in other words, we're going to have armed guards. This is going to be a really big deal. And surprisingly, in verse 37, they agree. No one shuts him down. They agree. Peggy. Okay.
It's not unusual that you would look for somebody to administer this because the king does nothing but eat wonderful food and be lavishly served by the minions.
The minions. Us minions. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And you're right. I mean, even in England, you have the king and the queen, but you have the prime minister who does the real work of government, you know, and it's been that way for centuries. So thanks for mentioning that. So they all agree. It must be obvious the interpretation is correct. And also, I think it's the sincerity of Joseph when he's talking. You know, Joseph isn't saying, you need to find a wise man. Juan, did you have something? I couldn't say it last sentence. Joseph? Okay. Okay. Okay, good thought. Thanks for sharing that one. Yes. And that could be that's why it was accepted so readily too. That's a good point. Good point. Good. Now here's the thing. What kind of reputation does Joseph have? Now, if you were to walk up and talk to Potiphar, not Potiphar's wife, Potiphar, or talk to the leader of the prison, what kind of reputation would Joseph have, do you think? Great reputation. Adjectives to describe Joseph. Trustworthy. Hardworking. What's that? In favor? Thank you. Integrity. There's so much fun to talk through. What else? Respectful. Okay. Positive. Good. These, and there's even more. I mean, we're talking about selfless, committed. He's ethical. He's wise. He's blessed by God. He enhances everything he does. Every time he's involved in a project, it's better than if he wasn't there before. That's the type of man Joseph is, and that's the type of man Pharaoh needs. Now, Joseph isn't saying, here I am, but that's exactly what Bill will talk about next week, not to steal all his thunder, but that's basically what they're going to say next week. It's just, this is the type of man that we need. So the end. My question is, what is God doing in your life, in my life, that requires waiting? All of us go through periods where we have to wait. And all of us love to wait because we love our character building, right? You know, we're Americans. We want it done yesterday. And maybe God prolongs it for a day or two to prove that, no, we're not going to have it our way. And also, what do we do while we wait? Do we bloom where we're planted, as it were? Do we seek the well-being of others around us? Do we seek to be selfless and loyal and committed? Because the day may come that somebody may ask, hey, what about this guy, Jeff? What's he like? Oh, Jeff, let me tell you about Jeff. You know, because you want to have that reputation, because it may be a part of what God's doing for you to bring you one step higher. One more thing, too. When presented with sin, and we all are, don't give in to temptation. If Joseph had given in to Potiphar's wife, I mean, the story would be a lot different. There'd be fewer chapters in Genesis. Okay? Don't give in to temptation while you're waiting. Keep on plowing through. Psalm 27:14 says, wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. Wait. Don't take it up in your own hands. Don't do shortcuts. Genesis is a book of people who took shortcuts, and each time they did it, they wound up regretting it. Without exception. Don't take the shortcut. Allow God to take you on the long way. Because as John mentioned, which fits so perfectly, he's not just concerned about where you're going. He's concerned about how you're getting there, what you're like when you're going there, and what you're going to be like after you're there. It's all important. It's not just the narrow one thing. Bill, do you have one more thing?
Yeah, it's like the jobs I give my kids. I'm loading the dishwasher. Well, that's a mundane job, but they'll go on to something. I don't know where this goes, Dad, and all of a sudden the job just stops. Okay? I say, do what you know you can do instead of worrying about the one thing you can't do. And so finish the job. And oftentimes when you're doing the job, then it comes to you what to do with that one thing you didn't know what to do with. Finish and don't just stop. And that's what we do in life also.
Yes.
We get going and we find something we can do. All the world has stopped. I can't do anything. Woe is me. Instead of doing what you can do and let God take care of the things you can. And eventually, sometimes, and he says, God hears his beloved even in their sleep.
Yes.
And often I've had answers come to me of things I didn't know what to do, but I continue to do what I could do. And God gives me those other things in his time.
Yes, he does. Very, very good point. Thanks so much. All right, I'm going over time again. So odd. Lord, please bless us today with your word. Please plug in, Father, these principles and facts. Help us to be willing to wait. Help us to be willing to endure. And not only that, but to thrive. To do the things that we know we should do in order that you might show us the other things in your time. Lord, please be with us in the next service. Please be with Matt and the worship team, Lord. Help them to sing your praises. And Lord, again, please embody the praises of your people. And second of all, please be with Pastor Jason as he preaches your word. May he preach your word with power, with zeal, with passion, with love. And may we grow in you because of our time together. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.